A night school student?
Dr. Foster spat the words out like poison.
You dare call that a real high school education? That's where dropouts and failures go to get their pity diplomas. It barely deserves to be called a school.
I had to come to ask for his blessing to marry his beloved daughter, Natalie, but instead faced complete rejection from her father. The luxurious living room of their mansion suddenly felt suffocating. The expensive furniture and artwork on the walls serving as stark reminders of the gulf between our social standings. But night school is still... I tried to explain, my voice trembling slightly. Dr. Foster cut me off mid-sentence, his face reddening with anger.
This is exactly why I can't stand ignorant people. Get out of my sight, you worthless nobody.
He grabbed the tissue box from the polished coffee table and hurled it at my head. I ducked instinctively, the box missing me by inches and hitting the wall behind with a dull thud. Unable to bear the humiliation any longer, I fled from their home, ignoring the desperate calls from both Natalie and her mother. The perfectly manicured garden that had impressed me on my way in now seemed to mock my hasty retreat. Years later, when I would meet this man who had belittled me so thoroughly, his attitude would change dramatically. That's getting ahead of myself. This is the story of how I turned my life around. My name is Michael Waters, and I grew up in a single-parent household in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Our apartment was small, but clean, filled with the warmth of my mother's love rather than material possessions. To pay for my education, my mom worked multiple jobs: retail during the day, convenience store in the evenings, and various odd jobs from home. Sometimes even to pick up night shifts at a warehouse. She was quite literally working herself to exhaustion, yet she never complained. My mother had always been petite, but her frame grew increasingly frail as the years passed. Her shoulders seemed to shrink under the weight of her responsibilities. Her once vibrant black hair had started graying prematurely, and dark circles had become permanent fixtures under her eyes. Watching her work herself to the bone while I could do nothing to help filled me with frustration and guilt. During summer break of my sophomore year, my worst fears came true. I was sitting in our tiny kitchen, attempting to solve some math problems, when the phone rang. Mom had collapsed at her retail job. I had always worried this day might come, and now it had become reality. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room seemed harsh and unforgiving as I waited for news about my mother's condition. The antiseptic smell and rhythmic beeping of medical equipment would become all too familiar in the months to come. Thankfully, this first incident wasn't immediately life-threatening, and she was discharged after a few days in the hospital. The doctors had run numerous tests, their concerned faces telling me more than their carefully chosen words. They suggested she reduce her workload, but after being discharged, Mom insisted she was fine and returned to her usual grueling schedule. "Mom, please!" I begged her one morning as she was prepared for work, her hands trembling slightly as she buttoned her uniform. "The doctor said you need rest." She smiled a gentle smile of hers, the one that always made my protest die in my throat. "Michael, sweetheart, I'm fine now. Besides, your education is more important than a little fatigue." But once something breaks, it doesn't easily mend. 2 months later, Mom ended up being admitted to University Hospital. This time, it wasn't just exhaustion. Her body was finally rebelling against years of overwork. Time passed, and by the summer of my junior year, everyone around me was thinking about their future plans. While my classmates chatted excitedly about college applications and dream careers, I was struggling with my own decision. What can I do for my mom? This question became the foundation of my career planning, keeping me awake at night as I stared at the water stains on our apartment ceiling. Given Mom's ongoing hospitalization, we still had some savings, but considering her hospital stay might continue indefinitely, getting a job right after middle school seemed like the only responsible option. Mounting medical bills felt like a weight pressing down on my chest every time I thought about them. Not knowing who else to turn to, I confided in my homeroom teacher, Mrs. Martinez, one afternoon after classes. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the classroom windows as I explained my situation. She responded thoughtfully, her kind eyes showing genuine concern. "Michael, wanting to help your mother is admirable. Your dedication to family speaks volumes about your character, but your academic performance is exceptional. You're consistently at the top of your class. That's why I think you should consider continuing your education." She paused, adjusting her reading glasses before continuing. "Having more education will give you more options to help your mother in the future. There's also the option of night school. You could work during the day and study in the evenings. I've had several students take this path successfully. I just feel it would be a waste to give up on education entirely." Her suggestion surprised me. In all my late night worrying, I hadn't known about night school programs. I thought my only options were either getting a job or going to regular high school. But at night school, I could earn money for mom's hospital bills while continuing my education, and it would give me more opportunities to help mom in the future. My path forward suddenly became clearer, and the following spring, I enrolled in night school. The registration process was straightforward, though the counselor's eyes held a mix of sympathy and concern when I explained my situation. I wasn't looking for pity. I was looking for a chance. After becoming a high school student, I immediately started looking for work. The local newspaper became my constant companion, its job listing section marked up with red circles and annotations. I took whatever jobs I could find: convenience stores, warehouse night shifts, even construction site labor. My hands grew calloused, and muscles I didn't know had ached at the end of each day. I wouldn't turn down any job I was capable of doing. Pride had no place in my situation. Only results mattered. Each paycheck brought a small sense of accomplishment, though it never seemed quite enough. I worked during the day, attend night school in the evenings, and whenever I had free time, I'd visit mom at University Hospital. The hospital hallways became as familiar as our apartment building's corridors. It was fortunate the hospital was close to home, but with this schedule, I still couldn't spend as much time with her as I wanted. This worried me constantly, though mom would always insist I was doing more than enough. One particularly exhausting day, while killing time at the hospital cafe before visiting hours, I noticed a handwritten note in the napkin holder. The paper was pink, the handwriting neat and cheerful. Now hiring cafe staff. Join our team and enjoy beautiful views and the aroma of fresh coffee while you work. This was perfect. A way to earn money while being closer to mom. The timing couldn't have been better. My current convenience store job was cutting hours, and the commute to the construction site was eating into my study time. I might not be a doctor or nurse, but I could still work in the hospital. The location was ideal, close to home and mom. I'd save on transportation costs too. Plus, the cafe work would be less physically demanding than construction, giving me more energy for my studies. I approached the counter, my heart beating a little faster for anticipation. The young woman behind the register had warm brown eyes and a welcoming smile that put me at ease immediately. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'd like to apply for the job opening." The employee, whose name tag read Natalie, smiled warmly and replied with enthusiasm that seemed genuine rather than rehearsed. "It's wonderful. I think we'll have fun working together. I'm looking forward to it." "Oh, thank you," I managed to respond, caught off guard by her immediate acceptance. Soon after, I started working at the cafe alongside Natalie Foster. While there were other staff members, she was always there no matter which shift I worked. She ended up teaching me everything about the job, from the precise temperature for brewing different coffee beans to the subtle art of creating the perfect latte foam. She was bright, always smiling, and genuinely passionate about her work at the cafe. Though cheerful and carefree, she took her responsibilities seriously and loved what she did. Even the most demanding customers would leave with a smile after interacting with her. She was also an excellent teacher. Under her patient guidance, I quickly learned the ropes and felt comfortable in my role. She had a way of breaking down complex tasks into manageable steps, much like my night school teachers did with difficult subjects. The hospital cafe wasn't particularly busy, but we had a steady stream of customers throughout the day. The morning rush would bring doctors grabbing coffee before their rounds, while afternoon saw a mix of visitors seeking comfort in warm drinks and sweet treats. Unlike a regular coffee shop, we could easily identify our clientele. Patients in hospital gowns shuffled in for a change of scenery. Visitors in street clothes sought refuge from the emotional weight of their hospital visits. Doctors in white coats rushed through between appointments, and nurses in scrubs grabbed quick bites during their breaks. Watching the patients in their gowns day after day stirred something in me, a feeling I couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was empathy, or maybe it was the realization that behind each hospital gown was a story not unlike my mother's. I tried to treat everyone equally and professionally, but I'll admit, I had complicated feelings about the medical staff. Each time a doctor walked in, I found myself studying them intently, noting how they carried themselves, how they spoke, how they interacted with others. I respected them, especially for caring for mom and other patients. They were doing things I couldn't do, saving lives, easing pain, giving hope. Maybe that's why I unconsciously kept them at arm's length. Gratitude mixed with envy. It was complicated. "Michael, I need to step away for a bit," Natalie called out one afternoon, breaking my reverie. "Can you watch the counter? Call me if you need anything." "Yeah, sure, got it," I replied, watching as she untied her apron. After working together for several months, Natalie and I had become quite comfortable with each other. We developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's moves during busy periods, and filling the quiet moments with comfortable conversation. She really was thoughtful and amazing, whether she was remembering a regular customer's complex order or noticing when I was having a rough day. Her kindness seemed effortless and genuine. As I watched her walk away, I noticed an older gentleman in a white coat heading towards the cafe. Something about his bearing set him apart from our usual customers. There was an air of quiet authority about him, tempered by kind eyes that crinkled at the corners.
"Ah, young man. Michael, isn't it?"
He asked, his voice warm and engaging. "Dr. Anderson! Yes, sir. Thank you for everything you do." I straightened up instinctively, recognizing Mom's primary physician.
"Indeed it is. I apologize for not checking in more often. How old are you now?"
He leaned against the counter casually, as if he had all the time in the world. "I'm 17, sir."
17 already? Time really does fly, huh?
He chuckled, shaking his head.
"You've grown so much since I first met you."
Dr. Anderson was not just Mom's doctor, but also the hospital's chief of medicine. Unlike what you might expect from someone in his position, he wasn't arrogant at all. There was no hint of condescension in his manner, no trace of the superiority complex I'd observed in some other doctors. He was different, very human, very approachable. He remembered every patient and their families personally, often asking about specific details from previous conversations. His medical skills were beyond reproach, truly outstanding. That's why he was popular with both staff and patients alike, always in demand.
"I had a brief break and thought I'd stop by the cafe."
Dr. Anderson continued, gazing out the window.
"I love the view of the courtyard from here. It's quite therapeutic, isn't it?"
"It is," I agreed, following his gaze to the carefully maintained garden outside. Sometimes I catch myself staring out there, lost in thought.
"Ah, I bet you do. I bet you do."
He turned back to me, his expression curious.
"Hey, I didn't realize until now. You're working here at the cafe? When did this happen?"
"Yes, sir. It works perfectly for me. Close to home, and I can visit Mom easily. Plus, as you said, the view is lovely." I began preparing his usual order, black coffee with just a hint of cream.
Yes, that makes sense. But
He paused, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks.
at your age, shouldn't you be in school? Not that I'm trying to pry."
"I attend night school, sir. Classes are in the evening, so I can work here during the day and still earn money for Mom's hospital bills and our living expenses," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. Even after months of this arrangement, I still felt defensive when people questioned my educational choices.
"Night school?
His eyebrows rose in surprise.
That's quite clever. A very practical solution. But still..."
He stroked his chin thoughtfully.
"Forgive me for asking, but are you managing alright?"
"Dr. Anderson?"
I just had an interesting thought. Would you like to hear it?"
That conversation with Dr. Anderson led to my becoming a nurse's aide at the hospital. He explained that there was an opening in the general ward, an entry-level position requiring no specific qualifications. I'd be helping with patient care, supporting the nurses, and maintaining the facilities, all without performing any actual medical procedures. It would even let me help care for Mom sometimes, though Dr. Anderson was careful to explain that I wouldn't be assigned to her ward directly. Professional boundaries needed to be maintained. Despite the predominantly female staff, there was actually a high demand for male nurses' aides. Many patients, particularly elderly men, felt more comfortable being assisted by someone of the same gender. Plus, the physical aspects of the job, helping patients move, lifting equipment, transporting supplies, often required significant strength. So I made sure to handle the heavy lifting and physical tasks whenever possible. The strength I built from construction work came in handy in unexpected ways. Whether it was helping transfer patients between beds or moving medical equipment, I took pride in being useful. After finishing a particularly demanding task one day, helping move several beds for deep cleaning, I was taking a breather in the staff room when Sarah, the head nurse, approached. "Michael," she said, her normally stern expression softened her appreciation. "Thank you for your hard work. I feel a bit guilty always relying on you for the heavy lifting, but you've been such a tremendous help. We really appreciate it." Being thanked especially by someone like the head nurse who rarely gave out praise felt genuinely good. It was different from the polite thanks I received at the cafe or the grudging acknowledgments at construction sites. The work was honestly tougher than any job I had before, more demanding than even my construction gigs. The physical labor was just part of it. There was also the emotional toll of seeing people at their most vulnerable, of witnessing both recovery and decline. But when people express their gratitude and show their appreciation, all that difficulty seemed to melt away. Maybe it seemed trivial to others, but helping people, making them happy, it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't found in my previous jobs. Working at the hospital, I found myself particularly drawn to the doctor's ability to save lives. I would watch them during rounds whenever I could, observing how they analyzed symptoms, made decisions, and communicated with patients. Their knowledge and skills seemed almost magical at times. That's when I first started seriously thinking, I want to become a doctor. It was just a vague dream at first, like wishing on a distant star. Until then, I'd been working frantically just to survive, focused on the immediate needs of paying bills and keeping mom comfortable. Well, maybe someone like me could dare to dream. The thought would creep into my mind during quiet moments, while changing bed linens, during late night study sessions, in the precious minutes between shifts. Maybe if I tried hard enough, even I could become a doctor. It was the first time in a long while I felt excited about the future. The mere possibility made my steps lighter, gave my studies new purpose. I started paying even closer attention during my biology classes at night school, and borrowed medical textbooks from the hospital library to read during breaks. And I had another reason to feel optimistic about life. Natalie, my coworker from the cafe. What started as friendly chats over coffee prep had blossomed into something more. She'd stay late after her shift to help me clean up, and I'd arrive early to help her set up for the morning rush. We had started dating shortly after meeting, our relationship growing as naturally as breathing. Now, we were talking about marriage, spending quiet moments planning a future together. She never complained about my busy schedule or modest means. Instead, she'd bring me dinner during my study sessions and help me review for exams. We never argued, and honestly, I probably took advantage of her generous nature too often. She'd insist on paying when we went out, saying her part-time job was just for pocket money while mine supported my family. She understood my situation and continued to support me, even after I became a nurse's aide. We were happy. Or at least I thought we were. The future seemed full of possibility, like a path opening up before me. As time passed, we finally decided to meet each other's parents to discuss marriage. We would start with Natalie's parents. It seemed logical since they lived nearby, and my mother was still in the hospital. Her father was a doctor at a university hospital. That explained why she worked at the hospital cafe. Her father wanted to keep an eye on her. It must be quite sheltered, I thought, though she never acted spoiled or entitled. I'd never met Natalie's father, but I heard stories. The head nurse and even some typically stoic doctors had mentioned that Dr. Foster can be quite intimidating, and people often get scolded by him. One young resident had actually transferred to another hospital after a particularly harsh dressing down from Dr. Foster. That made me nervous about meeting him, especially as someone hoping to marry his only daughter. Add to that, she was his only child. The pressure felt immense. Michael, are you okay? You look really pale. Are you nervous? Natalie asked, her eyebrows forward with concern as she smiled at me. We were walking to her house on a crisp autumn evening, setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Yeah, sorry. Can't help being nervous. I tugged at my collar, wondering if I should have worn a tie after all. Don't worry. I know people say he's scary, but it'll be fine. I'm here with you, okay? She squeezed my hand reassuringly. Her confidence should have been comforting, but somehow it only made me more anxious. God, I feel pathetic, I thought. In all my years of facing hardship, I'd never been this nervous about anything. With heavy steps, I walked alongside Natalie to her family's home. The neighborhood itself was intimidating. Large houses set back from the street, perfectly manicured lawns, luxury cars in every driveway. Here we are, Natalie announced cheerfully, stopping in front of a grand house. She stopped suddenly, and when I looked up, I saw what could only be described as a mansion straight out of a movie. 3 stories of elegant architecture loomed before me, with perfectly symmetrical windows and a sweeping driveway that curved past a decorative fountain. Whoa, this is something else, I muttered. My mouth suddenly went dry. Don't worry. Come on, this way. Natalie tugged me forward, seemingly oblivious to my growing discomfort. Following Natalie's lead, I entered through the impressive front door to find her parents waiting in the foyer. The marble floors gleamed on the crystal chandeliers, making me acutely aware of my worn shoes. Oh my, welcome! You must be Michael Waters. Please, come in. Natalie's mother greeted warmly, her smile genuine and welcoming. Mrs. Foster seemed like a lovely person. Like mother, like daughter, I supposed. She had the same kind of eyes as Natalie, though her face showed signs of worry that made me wonder if living with Dr. Foster was as challenging as working with him. But Dr. Foster stood there with his lips pressed into a thin line, fixing me with what felt like a glare. He was tall and imposing in an expensive-looking suit, despite being at home. His graying hair was perfectly styled, and his stern expression made me feel like a bug under a microscope. Definitely not a welcoming atmosphere from him. "Well then, shall we move to the living room?" Mrs. Foster suggested, trying to ease the tension that had settled over us like a heavy blanket. Led by Mrs. Foster, the four of us headed to the living room. The space was immaculate, with plush furniture that probably cost more than a year's worth of my mother's hospital bills. Family photos lined the walls. Natalie growing up, family vacations, graduation ceremonies, all telling the story of a privileged life I could never relate to. As we sat drinking the tea Mrs. Foster had prepared, Dr. Foster finally spoke, his voice sharp and clinical.
Young man, which high school do you attend?
"Yes, sir. I attend Jefferson High." I sat up straighter, trying to project confidence I didn't feel.
Jefferson High? But I heard you work at the cafe during the day.
His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "I'm enrolled in the night school program, sir." The words felt like ashes in my mouth as I watched his expression darken. Dr. Foster let out a derisive laugh that seemed to echo off the high ceilings.
A night school student? You dare call that a real high school education? That's where dropouts and failures go to get their pity diplomas. It barely deserves to be called a school. More like a gathering place for academic rejects.
It must have looked like a deer in headlights. One simple answer had triggered an avalanche of insults, each word striking like a physical blow. Ignoring my stunned expression, Dr. Foster continued, his voice dripping with disdain.
Tell me, boy, when you walked through our gates, did you not feel how out of place you were? Did it not occur to you that someone like you has no business with my Natalie?
I glanced at Natalie and her mother, who both wore pained expressions. Mrs. Foster seemed to shrink into herself, while Natalie's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "With all due respect, sir, night school students," I tried to explain, my voice barely above a whisper.
This is exactly why I can't stand ignorant people. Get out of my sight, you worthless nobody.
His face had turned an alarming shade of red. He grabbed the tissue box from the coffee table and threw it at my head. The projectile missed, but his message was clear. I wasn't welcome here. I couldn't take it anymore. Fighting back tears, I ran from their house, barely registering the ornate furnishings and artwork that had so impressed me on the way in. Each step on the marble floor had echoed my shame and humiliation. "Michael, wait! Please wait! I'm begging you!" Natalie's desperate voice followed me down the driveway. I could hear her running after me, her footsteps quick and light on the pavement. Her voice grew closer until she caught my arm just as I reached the street. "Michael!" When I turned to face her, the tears I'd been holding back started flowing freely. I hated showing such weakness, but I couldn't stop them. "Michael, I'm so sorry about my father's behavior. I know an apology isn't enough, but..." Natalie repeatedly bowed her head, looking like she might cry herself. Her hands trembled as she gripped my sleeve. There was only one thing I could say to her. The words felt like glass in my throat, but they had to be said. "Natalie, please raise your head. Stop apologizing. Yes, your father's words shocked me, but I understand where he's coming from. You're his precious only daughter. Of course he wouldn't accept someone like me. It's okay. Your happiness is my happiness." I managed to keep my voice steady, though each word felt like a betrayal of my true feelings. I made the decision to step away from Natalie. It hurt. God, it hurt more than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. There was no other choice. The gap between our worlds was too wide, and I couldn't bear to cause her pain by making her choose between her family and me. But I wouldn't give up on everything else. This far and no further, I refused to give up on my dreams. Dr. Foster's words, harsh as they were, had lit a fire in me. I would prove him wrong. Prove that someone from night school could amount to something. 20 years passed. Now I'm at University Hospital wearing a lab coat that represents years of hard work and dedication. The familiar corridors hold different memories now. Not of a struggling student working multiple jobs, but of a respected physician helping others. The facilities here are still top-notch, but they've been modernized over the years. The cafe where I once had worked has been renovated. The view of the courtyard remains as therapeutic as ever. I was chatting with Dr. Anderson during a brief break when I heard a familiar voice from across the hall.
Well, if it isn't the chief of medicine. How are you?
The voice carried the same authoritative tone I remember from that terrible night 2 decades ago. As the voice's owner approached, I didn't recognize him at first. Time had taken its toll. His once perfect hair was now completely gray, and his proud posture showed signs of age. When I got a clear look at his face, it hit me. Dr. Anderson greeted him warmly.
Dr. Foster. How have you been? It's been a while since we had a chance to talk.
Dr. Foster, Natalie's father, a man who had once thrown me out of his house and stood there chatting with Dr. Anderson, seemingly oblivious to my presence. Finally, he turned toward me, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to place my face.
Oh, you're... the night school student. Yes, I remember you. It was quite the show you put on back there.
His voice held the same condescending tone I remembered. I recall those days vividly, though they felt like scenes from another life. I was tempted to point out how he hadn't changed at all, but he continued with an irritatingly smug tone.
That lab coat. Are you sick? Poor and sick. Perhaps you should seek divine intervention.
He let out a harsh laugh that echoed in the hallway. At that moment, Dr. Anderson let out a heavy sigh and addressed Dr. Foster with an expression of disappointment.
Foster, I'm disappointed. If anyone needs divine intervention, it's you. In fact, you'll be seeking help from Michael Waters right here.
Dr. Foster stared at Dr. Anderson, clearly confused. After a moment's thought, he started laughing again, the sound brittle and forced.
Ha! Chief, that's hardly a fitting joke. Me seeking help from him? What catastrophe would have to occur for that to happen?
Dr. Anderson's face remained serious as he spoke.
Foster, as chief of medicine, I'm being entirely serious. Your surgeon will be Dr. Michael Waters here. He's the one who will treat your condition.
What?
The color drained from Dr. Foster's face as he processed this information. The story goes back a few days. During a routine health check, they had found something concerning. The initial scans had revealed shadows that shouldn't have been there, leading to a series of increasingly worried consultations. Further tests revealed a serious condition that required immediate attention. While Dr. Foster had no symptoms yet, leaving it untreated wasn't an option. The diagnosis was clear and unforgiving. Without intervention, the prognosis was poor. It was the kind of condition that would inevitably lead to death if ignored. The tumor was located in a particularly challenging area, making the surgery complex and risky. The surgery required wasn't straightforward. It was highly complex, demanding both technical skill and extensive experience. Even with several skilled surgeons at a university hospital, the question was, who could guarantee success? Who should take on this crucial task? That's when Dr. Anderson specifically requested me.
Chief, this is absurd!
Dr. Foster's voice cracked slightly.
He's sick, isn't he? How can a sick person treat someone else's illness? Besides, he has no education. You need a medical license to perform surgery in the first place.
Dr. Anderson seemed too exasperated to speak, rubbing his temples slowly. I decided to address Dr. Foster directly, keeping my voice professional and calm. Dr. Foster, I should clarify something. I'm not sick. I'm wearing a lab coat because I just returned to the States, and Dr. Anderson recommended a checkup. And I assure you, I'm a fully licensed physician. Back when I was working as a nurse's aide, Dr. Anderson had caught me observing the doctors at work. During quiet moments between tasks, I would linger in doorways, watching procedures and rounds of undisguised fascination. When he asked me about it, I honestly shared my dream of becoming a doctor. He looked me straight in the eyes and listened intently, showing none of the dismissal or skepticism I'd come to expect when sharing my aspirations. Recognizing my dedication to work and passion for medicine, he offered to help fund my medical education. The words seemed too good to be true when he first spoke them. The costs were astronomical, not just for undergraduate studies, but especially for medical school. The numbers he mentioned casually were more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I couldn't believe someone with no blood relation would offer such support, so I questioned his motives. My voice tinged with disbelief. Sir, I'm incredibly grateful for your offer, but why would you do this for someone like me?
My boy, you make it sound so lonely.
He smiled warmly.
You're not just anyone to me. You're the son of a cherished patient and a valued member of our hospital family. You have an incredibly giving heart, and with that sharp mind of yours, you understand your calling. You want to help people like your mother. You want to make many people happy. Don't you see? You remind me of myself when I was young. So helping you feels natural to me. Consider it my investment in the future.
I was really blessed with amazing people in my life. Even in my darkest moments, there were those who saw something in me worth nurturing. Encouraged by Dr. Anderson's words, I threw myself into studying for medical school with renewed determination. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time it felt achievable. Other doctors helped too, sharing their knowledge and experience freely. Even Dr. Anderson, despite his busy schedule, took time to teach me. During lunch breaks or after his rounds, he would explain complex medical concepts in ways that made them accessible. I knew it would take an extraordinary effort. My high school grades, while good, needed improvement to meet medical school standards. I had to repeat my senior year, focusing entirely on academics this time. But finally, after countless sleepless nights and endless study sessions, I made it into medical school. Once I got in, things went smoothly. The years of observing hospital operations had given me practical insights that many of my classmates lacked. I proudly earned my medical license, graduating near the top of my class. Dr. Foster was still frowning after hearing my story. Well, given what he said before, I couldn't blame him for being skeptical. The transformation from a night school student to a licensed physician must seem impossible to someone with his rigid worldview.
Even if I accept that you have a medical license,
He said slowly.
this isn't some routine procedure. My condition requires exceptional skill, and I couldn't possibly trust such a complex surgery to some novice doctor.
Dr. Anderson shook his head, his disappointment evident.
Foster, I thought you were a doctor who kept up with the latest medical developments. But I see I was wrong. I'm disappointed you don't know about Dr. Waters' remarkable achievements.
Dr. Anderson sighed heavily and continued, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. When I finally earned my medical license, I can help people with my own hands. I was overjoyed. Until Mom passed away. Despite all our efforts, despite achieving my dream of becoming a doctor, I couldn't save her. Her last words to me still echo in my heart. Michael, don't just help me anymore. Make many people happy. There are so many people in this world who need your hands. I've been so happy to have such a wonderful son. My mother remained kind-hearted until the end, thinking of others even in her final moments. She had been my pillar of strength through all the hardships, but her spirit lives on in my heart, driving me forward each day. Carrying her final wish to help many people, I decided to join Doctors Without Borders. It wasn't an easy decision, leaving behind the comfort and security of University Hospital for unknown challenges abroad. But I knew it was the right choice. The work often took me to dangerous places, areas devastated by natural disasters or torn apart by conflict. Many countries lacked advanced medical facilities, and treatment methods couldn't match U.S. standards. Some areas were riddled with infectious diseases, presenting real dangers to my own safety. Still, I went wherever I was needed, regardless of the risk. Thankfully, my relentless efforts gained international recognition. What started as humble service grew into something larger than I could have imagined. Now I receive requests from hospitals worldwide, called in for particularly challenging cases that others have deemed impossible. Even in the States, I'm treated with perhaps excessive respect at most hospitals. The attention sometimes makes me uncomfortable. I'm still that same night school student at heart, just trying to help where I can. I had just returned from my latest assignment at a Southeast Asian hospital when Dr. Anderson contacted me about Dr. Foster's case. Despite our history, when someone needs my help, I have no reason to refuse. I flew back immediately specifically to operate on Natalie's father. Dr. Anderson placed a hand on my shoulder.
Dr. Waters, or should I say the world-renowned Dr. Waters, I really appreciate this. I know it must have been complicated emotionally, but please, for my sake, help him.
Chief, you're being melodramatic, I said with a slight smile. Besides, I can separate personal feelings from professional responsibilities. A patient is a patient, regardless of our past. Dr. Anderson nodded thoughtfully. While 20 years had passed, this was clearly a lot for Dr. Foster to process. He maintained a skeptical expression, but we had more tests scheduled, so I simply said, Dr. Foster, I promise you this. I will cure your condition. I will ensure this surgery's success, so you can return to being the excellent physician you are. Dr. Anderson nodded approvingly, while Dr. Foster continued to look dubious. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The man who had once thrown me out of his house would now have to trust me with his life. I excused myself and headed to the next examination room. There were other patients who needed my attention, and I couldn't let personal history interfere with my duties. Several days later, it was time for Dr. Foster's surgery. The operating room was silent except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft clink of surgical instruments. My team worked with practice efficiency, each person knowing their role perfectly. It was indeed a complex procedure that took several hours. The location of the tumor made access challenging, requiring all my skill and experience. But years of performing difficult surgeries under less than ideal conditions had prepared me well. Nevertheless, the surgery was successful. With proper recovery, he'd be back to practicing medicine soon. The relief on his family's faces when I delivered the news made all the past hurt fade away. It had been a while since I performed such an intricate operation in such a well-equipped facility. Most of my recent surgeries have been in field hospitals or understaffed clinics, where improvisation was often necessary. During the post-operative period, I conducted several follow-up examinations. Dr. Foster would check his own test results and medical charts with the critical eye of an experienced physician, seeming pleased each time with what he saw. During one of these checkups, I was reviewing his latest scans when he spoke up.
Dr. Waters. No, that's not right. Dr. Michael Waters. I cannot thank you enough. My recovery is progressing remarkably well, undeniably thanks to you.
Dr. Foster? I looked up from the charts, startled by his humble tone. I wondered if we'd given him too much medication. I'd never seen him so subdued, so lacking in his usual arrogance.
Dr. Waters, your skill is absolutely genuine. Please forgive my past transgressions. Be honest, if I had been the surgeon, I doubt I would have succeeded. You accomplished it in just a few hours. Your expertise is a treasure not just to American medicine, but to the world. I'm ashamed I didn't know about a surgeon of your caliber. After how arrogantly I behaved, this is presumptuous of me, but I must ask, once I'm back on my feet, would you consider teaching me your techniques and sharing your knowledge?
Dr. Foster, you're giving me too much credit, I replied professionally. As I said, I separate work from personal matters, so please don't worry about the past. I'm still learning myself, and someone with your years of experience surely knows more than I do. For now, please focus on resting and recovering. I kept my response professionally detached and left the room. While it was almost amusing to see someone do such a complete reversal, I had other patients to attend to. Years of medical practice had taught me to maintain professional boundaries, regardless of personal history. Dr. Foster's condition remained stable, and he would be discharged soon. He would return to saving lives himself, perhaps with a new perspective on judging others. During a brief break between patients, I decided to visit the old hospital cafe. The familiar scent of coffee brought back a flood of memories.
Welcome!
Called out the young man about the same age I'd been back then. He was gazing out the window, just as I used to do. Yes, that view. I get it, young man. Even with my hectic schedule traveling around the world, this view remains as beautiful and soothing as ever. The carefully maintained courtyard still provides a peaceful respite for patients and staff alike. Then, I heard a familiar voice from afar. Is that Michael? It was Natalie. 20 years changes people, but I recognized her immediately. Her hair had touches of gray now, but her smile was just as warm as I remembered. Natalie, you haven't changed. It's been a long time. Who would have thought we'd meet again in this cafe? It reminds me of when we first met, she said softly, gesturing at the counter where we spent so many hours working together. Yeah, feels like a lifetime ago. Are you here to visit your father? Yes, I had some time before visiting hours, so I stopped by. And here I am, running into my father's savior. Michael, Dr. Waters. I've heard about everything, about how you've been saving lives around the world, and how you came back to save my father. I can't thank you enough. Natalie excitedly grabbed my hand, the gesture so reminiscent of our younger days. Surprised, I looked down at our joined hands and noticed a ring gleaming on her left ring finger. Of course, 20 years is a long time. A woman like Natalie would have had many suitors. Well, I can't say it doesn't hurt a little, even after all this time. I must have stared at her wedding ring for quite a while because Natalie spoke up, her voice tinged with sadness. Oh, I got married a few years ago, Michael. I'm so sorry about back then. I was truly happy during our time together. I really intended to marry you. That day in my house, never imagined you would be hurt so deeply. It's been weighing on my conscience all these years. I wanted to apologize but never had the courage. I know an apology won't change anything. I'm truly sorry. Had Natalie been carrying this guilt all these years? Maybe even decades? The thought of her burdening herself with our past made my heart ache. Natalie, you weren't at fault then, and you're not at fault now. Please, don't worry about it. If anything, your father's words that day lit a fire under me. In a way, I got this far because of him. Michael, you haven't changed at all. Still so kind. That's a lie, saying I wasn't bothered. Deep down, I worked hard hoping that becoming a successful doctor might give me another chance of Natalie, might make her father accept me. It had been a driving force in my early years of study. As I kept busy with medical career, those feelings naturally faded, replaced by a pure desire to help people. Work became its own reward. Each life saved a testament to this path I'd chosen. So meeting like this, talking with Natalie, gave me a sense of closure. The young love we shared would always be a precious memory. But we had both found our own ways forward. More importantly, aren't you going to be late for visiting hours? Your father's been looking forward to seeing you.
Oh no, you're right. I have to go. Thank you for being so good to my father. I'll hear all about your achievements from him too. See you around.
And watched Natalie leave, then turned back to the window view. The courtyard hadn't changed much in 20 years. Same trees, same benches where patients sat to enjoy the fresh air. Mom, are you watching? Despite everything, I'm living a happy life. Sometimes I wish you were here to see it. But I know you'd be proud of the path I've chosen. My life has had many obstacles, countless hardships, strong headwinds. But no matter how difficult the path, if you stay true to yourself and keep moving forward, a way will always open up. As a doctor, I want to do more than just save lives. I want to pass on this conviction. Maybe that too can save someone's heart, just as Dr. Anderson once saved mine with his belief in me. For the joy of many people, I continue my rounds today as well, hearing the lessons of my past as I walk these familiar hospital halls.